My parents secretly drained their retirement to fund my golden child brother's fake lifestyle, only to show up at my sleek corporate office begging for a bailout. They thought I was still the quiet loser they ignored for 24 years, but I was about to show them exactly who held the cards now, and the truth I uncovered sent their favorite son straight to a jail cell. If I had to describe my family dynamic in one word, it would be lopsided. But honestly, even that feels like a massive understatement. Growing up, my parents didn't just have favorites. They had a singular, undeniable obsession. And his name was Caleb. My younger brother was their absolute pride and joy, the one they doted on, praised relentlessly, and supported in every conceivable way. And me? My name is Liam, and I was the invisible one. I was the kid who got just enough basic attention to keep me alive and out of the foster system, but nowhere near enough to ever feel like I actually mattered to the people who brought me into this world. Caleb was one of those kids everyone naturally gravitated toward. He had this magnetic, exhausting energy. He was always smiling, always talking loudly, always charming the adults from the moment he could string a sentence together. My parents acted like he was the second coming, a literal miracle placed on this earth just for them. I, on the other hand, was quieter, highly observant, and much more reserved. I preferred reading thick fantasy novels, sketching architectural designs, and tinkering with little mechanical projects in the solitude of my room. I wasn't the type of kid who lit up a room when I walked in, and because of that, I was entirely uninteresting to them. The favoritism started small when we were in elementary school. Caleb always got more toys, newer clothes, and bigger portions at dinner. At first, my naive child brain rationalized it. I thought maybe it was just because he was younger, and my parents were trying to keep the peace with a hyperactive toddler. But as we grew older, the disparity only widened, and it became crystal clear that this had absolutely nothing to do with age. It was about him being their shining star, and me being the unfortunate, boring byproduct of their early marriage. Birthdays were the most glaring, painful examples of this dynamic. For Caleb's birthdays, my parents went completely scorched earth. I'm talking massive catered parties, expensive electronics, and the entire neighborhood invited. When he turned 10, they bought him a brand new $400 gaming console and threw a backyard carnival. For my 10th birthday that same year, I got a grocery store sheet cake and a $3 pack of generic gel pens. When I asked why Caleb got a console and I got pens, my mother didn't even look up from her magazine. She just sighed and said, "Caleb needs stimulation, Liam. You just like to sit in your room and draw. The pens are practical." But it wasn't just the material neglect that destroyed my self-esteem. The emotional starvation hurt so much worse. When I was in 8th grade, I managed to get straight A's on my final report card. I had stayed up late for weeks studying for my algebra and science finals. I was bursting with pride, genuinely believing that this undeniable proof of my intelligence would finally make them look at me with the same awe they reserved for Caleb. I ran into the kitchen and handed the paper to my dad. He glanced at it for exactly 2 seconds, handed it back, and said, "That's nice, Liam." Then he immediately turned his back to me and started cheering because Caleb had just walked in, wearing his middle school basketball uniform. Caleb was a terrible basketball player. He was a bench warmer who had scored exactly 2 points on a lucky free throw all season. Yet my parents treated those 2 points like he had just won the NBA Finals. They took him out for steak that night. I stayed home and ate leftover casserole. That kind of soul-crushing dismissal happened constantly. If Caleb showed even a passing interest in something, my parents were all in. They bought him top-tier sports gear, signed him up for expensive private lessons, and screamed themselves hoarse at every single game. But when I showed an interest in something, getting them to care was like trying to pull teeth from a shark. When I was 16, I told them I wanted to start a small online shop selling custom-engraved wooden desk accessories. I had been saving my meager allowance for months and just needed a $150 loan to buy a starter rotary tool and some raw materials. I even drafted a little business plan to show them I was serious. My dad literally laughed in my face. He tossed my business plan onto the kitchen island and said, "Don't waste your time on arts and crafts, Liam. Focus on getting a practical job. We aren't made of money." Exactly 3 months later, Caleb announced he was starting a luxury streetwear brand. It was the most derivative, lazy idea I had ever heard. My parents immediately opened their checkbooks. They gave him $10,000. They helped him buy bulk inventory, paid for a slick professional website, and hired a freelance graphic designer to create a logo that looked like it took 5 minutes to draw. I remember sitting on the stairs watching boxes of overpriced, poorly printed t-shirts being loaded into our garage, thinking, why does he get the world handed to him on a silver platter, while I have to beg for scraps? By the time I entered my senior year of high school, I learned a very valuable lesson. Stop expecting anything from them. Caleb was their son, and I was just a cold rock orbiting in the dark. They were so hyper-focused on ensuring Caleb's brand succeeded that they didn't even notice I was actively pulling away, building walls so high they would never be able to scale them. Caleb, naturally, thrived on the attention. He developed this incredibly smug, insufferable attitude. He knew he was the golden child, and he took immense pleasure in rubbing my face in the dirt. If I bought a new pair of thrift store shoes with my own money, he'd smirk and say, "Wow, finally upgrading from the homeless look, Liam?" If I tried to speak at the dinner table, he would loudly interrupt me and steer the conversation back to his latest networking party. It was humiliating, and my parents never once corrected him. If I dared to complain, my mother would gaslight me, claiming I was being too sensitive and that Caleb was just expressing his vibrant personality. The absolute final straw, the moment the last remaining shred of love I had for my family evaporated, happened during the spring of my senior year. I had secretly entered a massive regional competition for young entrepreneurs. I spent 3 months preparing my pitch, designing 3D prototypes of eco-friendly office organizers, and perfecting a 10-minute presentation. When I won first place and the small cash grant, I practically flew home. I thought, naively, that a giant plaque and a giant cardboard check would finally force them to see my worth. I walked into the living room and announced my victory. My dad looked up from his laptop, blinked, and said, "That's nice, Liam. But hey, have you seen Caleb's new promotional flyers? The gloss on this cardstock is incredibly professional." My mom didn't even look up from her iPad. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just turned around, walked up to my room, locked the door, and cried. But I wasn't crying because I wanted their approval anymore. I was crying because I finally accepted the cold, hard truth. I was never going to get it. They were never going to love me the way I needed to be loved. From that night onward, my family was dead to me. I just needed to survive until graduation. I knew I couldn't rely on them for college or head start in life. They had sunk so much of their savings into Caleb's failing streetwear brand, which had sold a grand total of 12 shirts to his friends, that there wouldn't be a dime left for me. When I casually mentioned moving out after graduation to focus on my own business, they shut me down, claiming I needed to stay and pay rent to help support the family's future, meaning Caleb's business. That was the moment I realized they didn't just favor him. They viewed me as an expendable resource to be harvested for his benefit. So I went completely underground. I became a ghost in my own house. I started working 3 part-time jobs. I worked at a greasy diner smelling like old fries. I did grueling weekend landscaping in the sweltering heat, and I took overnight freelance data entry gigs. I hoarded every single penny in a secret bank account my parents knew nothing about. If they asked where I was, I lied and said I was volunteering at the library or studying. They never dug deeper because they were too busy fawning over Caleb's creative process. With my hidden funds, I bought a refurbished laptop and taught myself the absolute hardest parts of running an e-commerce business. I stayed up until 3 a.m. watching tutorials on search engine optimization, digital marketing algorithms, supply chain logistics, and graphic design. I worked entirely out of my cramped bedroom, constantly angling my screen away from the door and slamming my laptop shut if I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was exhausting, terrifying, and deeply isolating, but it was also the most exhilarating period of my life. For the very first time, I was building an empire of dirt that belonged solely to me. My business model was simple, but highly scalable. I created personalized, custom-engraved premium products: leather journals, heavy whiskey coasters, slate cheese boards, and corporate gifting sets. I sourced high-quality raw materials and invested in a compact, whisper-quiet laser engraver that I hid in my closet under a pile of old blankets. I will never forget the rush of my very first sale. It was an $18 custom slate coaster for a woman in Ohio. It wasn't life-changing money, but as I packaged that coaster in my dimly lit room, tears streamed down my face. a total stranger out in the world, valued something I had created with my own two hands. Meanwhile, Caleb's business was a catastrophic failure. He would come home at 2 a.m. reeking of cheap beer, flanked by his team of freeloading friends, complaining loudly about how the market just didn't understand his vision. Instead of cutting him off and forcing him to get a real job, my parents doubled down. They pulled money from their retirement to rent him a trendy, exposed brick office space downtown. I once overheard my dad telling him, "Don't stress, Caleb. Empires take time to build. You're the next Steve Jobs." I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard it bled just to keep from laughing out loud. Caleb was squandering their life savings on bottle service and Supreme hoodies, and they were clapping for him. While they were burning cash, I was quietly, methodically scaling up. I mastered social media marketing, targeting niche corporate event planners and wedding coordinators. I started landing bulk orders, 50 custom leather notebooks for a tech retreat, 200 engraved wooden coasters for a rustic wedding. By the time I crossed the stage at my high school graduation, my secret bank account was sitting at a very comfortable 5 figures, and my monthly revenue was steadily climbing. The day after graduation, I packed my 1998 Honda Civic with everything I owned. I didn't tell them I was leaving until my bags were already at the front door. My dad looked up from the television, barely registering my departure. "Good for you, Liam. Make sure you leave your forwarding address so you can send some money back to help Caleb with his overhead." I just smiled, a dead, cold smile. "Sure, Dad. I'll get right on that." I didn't move across town. I drove 14 hours straight to Denver, Colorado. I wanted a physical, geographical fortress between me and their toxicity. I rented a tiny, depressing one-room office above a noisy auto repair shop. It smelled like motor oil and had peeling yellow wallpaper. But when I turned the key in the lock, I felt a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated freedom wash over me. A lot of people in the comments are asking why I didn't just confront them or blow up at them before I left. The truth is, I couldn't risk it. If I had revealed how much money I was making while living under their roof, my parents would have legally tried to claim it, or they would have kicked me out before I had secured my supply chain and out-of-state office. Silence was my best armor. Update 1. The next 3 years in Denver were a blur of relentless, grinding hard work. Setting up my own life was terrifying, but I channeled every ounce of my childhood rejection into pure ambition. I expanded my product line aggressively. I moved beyond simple gifts and started securing massive recurring corporate contracts. Companies wanted high-end, personalized onboarding kits for their new hires, and I became the go-to vendor in the region. Within 18 months, I had moved out of the dingy room above the auto shop and leased a proper commercial warehouse. I hired a warehouse manager, 2 shipping assistants, and a dedicated customer service lead. By my 3rd year in business, I was 21 years old, pulling in mid-6 figures in personal profit, and had just signed the lease on a stunning glass-walled executive office in downtown Denver. Through all of this, I maintained a strict information diet with my family. I spoke to them maybe twice a year on major holidays, and our conversations lasted less than 5 minutes. They assumed I was working some dead-end retail job and struggling to pay rent. They never once asked for details, and I never offered them. It was a comfortable, silent arrangement. But while I was thriving, Caleb's house of cards was collapsing spectacularly. His luxury streetwear brand had officially filed for bankruptcy. The downtown office my parents had rented for him had been abandoned, and he was back living in their guest room. But instead of learning his lesson, Caleb pivoted. He convinced my parents that his true calling was tech, and he needed funding for a revolutionary networking app. My dad, completely blinded by his golden child syndrome, actually took out a second mortgage on their house to fund this phantom app. I didn't know any of this until a random Tuesday morning when I was sitting in my ergonomic chair, looking out over the Denver skyline, and my cell phone buzzed. The caller ID said, "Dad." My stomach gave a phantom lurch, a leftover reflex from my childhood. But I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" "Liam, it's your father," he said, his voice carrying that familiar, demanding edge. "We need to talk." "I'm at work, Dad. Make it quick," I replied, leaning back and spinning a custom-engraved titanium pen between my fingers. There was a heavy sigh on the line. "Your brother is launching a new tech startup. It's going to be massive, but he needs a little bridge capital to finalize the app development. We're hosting a family meeting this weekend. We expect you to fly back, sit down with us, and contribute. It's time you stop slacking off and help support this family's legacy." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a second. The absolute sheer audacity of the man was breathtaking. He had ignored me for 2 decades, mocked my ambitions, and now he was ordering me to fly across the country to hand over my money to the brother who had bullied me my entire life. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "You want me to fly home and give Caleb money? Are you out of your mind?" "Don't take that tone with me, Liam," my dad barked, his temper flaring instantly. "Family sticks together. We have sacrificed everything for you boys. People in town are starting to whisper about Caleb's last business, and we need this to work to protect our reputation. You owe us." "I don't owe you a damn thing," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy calm. "You didn't sacrifice anything for me. You sacrificed everything for Caleb. I'm not flying home, and I'm sure as hell not giving that failure a single red cent." My dad went ballistic. He started screaming about how ungrateful I was, how I was a selfish brat who would never amount to anything. And then he dropped his ultimate threat. "If you don't show up this weekend, I am cutting off all financial support. You won't get another dime from us for your little apartment." I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting years for. "Dad, you haven't given me a dime since I was 16. I haven't needed your money in years. I run a multi-million-dollar e-commerce logistics company. I have 12 employees. I own my own house in Denver. I am completely, entirely free of you. Do not ever call this number asking for money again." I hung up and immediately blocked his number. The fallout was instantaneous. 2 days later, my mother called from a different number. She tried the soft, weeping guilt trip approach. "Liam, sweetheart, please. Your brother is so stressed. We are a family. You can't just turn your back on us when we need you." "You turned your back on me the day I was born, Mom," I replied coldly. "I'm done being the background character in Caleb's tragedy. Lose my number." I thought blocking them would be the end of it. I drastically underestimated their desperation. A week later, I was wrapping up a quarterly review with my operations manager when my receptionist buzzed my desk. Her voice sounded deeply confused. "Liam, there is a woman in the lobby claiming to be your mother. She's demanding to see you." My blood ran cold. I walked out of my office and looked down the hallway. Standing in the sleek, modern lobby of my company, surrounded by glass partitions and busy employees, was my mother. She looked completely out of place, clutching her cheap purse, staring wide-eyed at the company logo glowing on the wall. I walked up to her, my face a mask of stone. "What the hell are you doing here?" She jumped, startled by my presence. She looked at my tailored suit, then around at the expensive office furniture. "Liam, this is all yours?" "Yes. Now why are you trespassing in my office?" She immediately burst into dramatic tears, trying to cause a scene so I would usher her into a private room. I didn't budge. I let her stand right there in the lobby. "Liam, please," she sobbed. "Your father and I are in a terrible financial bind. Caleb's app developers ran off with the funding. We have a second mortgage we can't pay. We just want a fresh start. We want to rebuild our relationship with you. We are so proud of you." I felt a wave of absolute disgust wash over me. "You aren't proud of me, Mom. You didn't even know what I did for a living until last week. You don't want a relationship. You want an ATM. You ignored me for 20 years, and now that your golden child has bankrupted you, you want me to foot the bill. The answer is no. Get out of my building before I have security escort you out." Her face hardened, the fake tears vanishing instantly. "You vindictive little sociopath," she hissed. "We are your parents. We gave you life. And I gave myself a future," I shot back. "Security!" She practically ran out the door. 2 days later, Caleb showed up. He didn't even make it past the lobby security desk. He looked awful, unshaven, wearing dirty sweatpants, reeking of desperation. He begged the guard to let him up, claiming he just needed a small loan of $50,000 to get back on his feet. I went down to the lobby, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "The only thing I'm giving you is a trespass warning. Stay away from me." He cried, right there in the lobby, but I felt absolutely nothing. I turned my back on him and went back to work. I genuinely believed that kicking them out of my office was the grand finale. I spent the next 6 months living in absolute peace. My business expanded internationally, I started dating an amazing woman, and my mental health had never been better. I was finally free. But reality has a funny way of catching up to people who make terrible choices. 4 weeks ago, I received a thick, certified letter in the mail at my home address. The handwriting was erratic and smudged. It was from my mother. I almost threw it directly into the fireplace, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. The letter was a chaotic, rambling manifesto of despair. Things at home hadn't just gotten worse, they had completely imploded. My parents had defaulted on the second mortgage they took out for Caleb's fake app. The bank had foreclosed on their house, the house I grew up in. They had been officially evicted and were now living in a squalid, roach-infested one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of their city. But that wasn't even the worst part. My dad, in a desperate bid to keep Caleb's lifestyle afloat, had secretly borrowed $50,000 from a former business client, promising a massive return on investment. When the client realized the money was gone, he sued my father for fraud and breach of contract. They were facing total financial ruin and potential criminal charges. And where was Caleb, the golden child, during this absolute nightmare? He was gone. The moment the eviction notice was pinned to the front door, Caleb packed his bags, stole my mother's remaining jewelry, pawned it, and fled to Los Angeles to crash with some influencers. He had completely blocked my parents' phone numbers. He abandoned them the second they ran out of money to give him. The letter ended with a pathetic, groveling plea for me to come save them. My mother wrote that they had learned their lesson and realized how horribly they had treated me. She begged me to pay off the lawsuit and help them find a new place to live. I sat on my couch in my beautiful, quiet home, staring at the tear-stained paper. A younger version of me would have felt a twisted sense of triumph. But at 24, I just felt a profound, heavy exhaustion. They had thrown their entire lives away for a parasite. A few days later, my aunt, my dad's sister, the only extended family member who ever sent me birthday cards, called me. She confirmed everything in the letter. "Liam, I know they don't deserve your help," she said softly. "But your dad is talking about ending things. He's completely broken. I'm just asking you to at least talk to them. Give them closure, if nothing else." I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I wrestled with a deep-seated anger that demanded I let them rot, and the lingering shred of humanity that couldn't stomach the thought of my parents living on the streets. Finally, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be their savior, and I certainly wasn't going to hand them a blank check. But I would step in, under my own draconian terms. I flew back to my hometown and drove a rental car to the address my mother had provided. The apartment complex was a decaying concrete monstrosity, surrounded by broken glass and overgrown weeds. I knocked on the peeling door of Unit 4B. My mother opened it. She looked like she had aged 20 years. Her hair was thinning, her face was gaunt, and the sheer shock of seeing me standing there made her legs give out. She collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing hysterically. "Liam, oh my God, you came. You actually came." I stepped over the threshold. The apartment smelled intensely of bleach, stale coffee, and hopelessness. My dad was sitting at a cheap folding table, surrounded by mountains of past due bills and legal threats. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. He didn't even have the energy to act proud anymore. He just looked utterly defeated. "I'm here," I said, my voice projecting absolute authority in the cramped room. "But we are going to do this exactly my way, or I am walking back out that door and you will never see me again. Do you understand?" They both nodded furiously, too terrified to speak. "Bring me every single bank statement, loan document, and tax return from the last 5 years. Everything," I demanded. For the next 6 hours, I sat at that rickety table and performed a ruthless forensic audit of their ruined lives. I combed through every line item, every wire transfer, every credit card statement, and that is when I found it. The twist that made my blood boil and my heart turn to absolute ice. I noticed a massive discrepancy in the funds from the second mortgage. My dad had authorized a withdrawal of $50,000 for Caleb's app developers. But the bank statement showed that an additional $85,000 had been wired out of the account over the course of 3 months, entirely draining the equity. I slammed my hand down on the papers, startling my parents. Dad, look at these transfers. Did you authorize these? My dad squinted at the paper, his hands trembling. No, I only signed off on the $50,000. The bank said we were overdrawn, but Caleb told me it was just a processing error with the app's server fees. I pulled up the routing numbers on my laptop. I did a quick public records search. The $85,000 hadn't gone to any server fees. It had been wired into a shell LLC registered in Delaware. The sole proprietor of that LLC? Caleb. He didn't lose your money, Dad, I said, the reality of the situation settling over the room like a suffocating blanket. He stole it. He forged your signature on these wire authorizations, funneled $85,000 into his own private account, and used it to fund his escape to California. Your golden child committed wire fraud and grand larceny against you. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother let out a horrific, guttural wail and buried her face in her hands. My dad just stared at the papers, his jaw trembling, as the ultimate betrayal finally shattered his delusion. The son they had worshipped had systematically robbed them blind and left them to face the legal consequences. I leaned back in my chair and delivered my ultimatum. Here is the deal, I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion. I will hire a ruthless defense attorney to settle the lawsuit with your client. I will pay off your immediate credit card debt, and I will set up a trust that pays the base rent on this apartment for exactly 2 years. That will give you time to get minimum wage jobs and learn how to survive. My mother looked up, her eyes wide with desperate gratitude. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not finished, I interrupted sharply. I will only do this under one non-negotiable condition. You are going to get in my rental car right now. We are driving to the police station, and you are going to hand these bank statements to a detective. You are going to press full criminal charges against Caleb for forgery and grand theft. My mother gasped, horrified. Liam, we can't send your brother to prison. He's just confused. He made a mistake. I stood up, packed my laptop into my bag, and headed for the door. Then rot here. Enjoy the lawsuit. Wait, my dad roared, his voice cracking with years of suppressed rage and heartbreak. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked at my mother, his eyes blazing with a furious, painful clarity. He stole from us, Martha. He left us to die. Liam is the only one trying to save us. We are going to the police. My mother wept the entire drive to the precinct, but she didn't try to stop us. We walked into the station and my dad laid everything out for the financial crimes detective. Because Caleb had forged documents to initiate interstate wire transfers, it wasn't just a local dispute. It was a federal felony. The detective took the evidence, and the look on his face confirmed that Caleb's life as a free man was rapidly coming to an end. That was a month ago. I kept my word. I hired a lawyer who negotiated a settlement for my dad's lawsuit, keeping him out of jail. I paid off their high-interest debts, and I prepaid the lease on their dingy apartment for 2 years. Yesterday, I got a call from the detective. Caleb was arrested at a luxury Airbnb in West Hollywood. He had blown through almost half the stolen money on VIP club tables and rented sports cars. He is currently sitting in a county jail cell, awaiting extradition back to our state to face multiple felony fraud charges. His bail is set at $200,000. My parents obviously can't pay it, and I wouldn't pay it if I had $1 billion sitting in cash. My parents are now working as cashiers at a local grocery store. They take the bus to work. They call me once a week, and they are painfully polite, walking on eggshells, terrified that I will cut off the rent payments. I don't love them. I don't think I ever will again. The damage they did to me is permanent. But as I sit here in my penthouse office, looking at the empire I built from the scraps they left me, I finally feel a profound, untouchable sense of peace. The universe balanced the scales, and I was the one holding the weights. Enjoyed the video? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Your support means the world to the channel. Thanks for watching.